Looks like everybody is in place. We're good. All right. We will go ahead and start with the City of Iowa City work session for October 19th, 2021. It is just after 4 p.m. And welcome everyone. We're going to start with the Community Police Review Board recommendation, update, and discussion. In our info packet from October 14th, our city manager gave us an update, and I'll ask him to present at this time.
Mayor, if I can interrupt, I don't think we started a roll call yet.
Oh.
Oh, sorry. Never mind.
Yeah.
My apologies.
Okay, thank you, Mayor. I would refer you to page 9 of your info packet. That's where the cover memo is. That's, again, the October 14th information packet. And we have a number of documents that can help us through this conversation. But a quick rewind for you. On December 22nd of 2020, the Cprb, at your request, sent you 13 different recommendations. And since that time, Council's had a couple of discussions. Cprb has had a number of ongoing discussions, and staff has been working towards resolution of each of those 13 recommendations. In terms of where we stand today, the City Council has already addressed 2 of those recommendations, and that was done through an ordinance amendment that you did earlier this year that expanded the complainant's ability to respond to the police chief's findings and also lengthened the statute of limitations for filing a complaint. Again, those 2 items were addressed through an ordinance earlier this year. 2 of the items did not require any council vote or direction. Those concerned the type of data the Cprb was getting from the police department, and Chief Liston spoke with the CPRB, got an understanding of what they were looking for, and agreed to supply them with that information in their public meeting packet. So that those 2 items have been addressed. Council may recall that you had directed the city attorney to review 6 of the recommendations, due to some potential conflicts with state law. The city attorney's memo is attached to my cover memo, so it's in the information packet if you'd like to reference that. If I had to summarize, I suppose, to move the conversation along, 5 of those 6 were found to have some conflict with state law. And again, if you've got questions, I'll defer to Eric on those 5 items. A 6th one was kind of framed as, yes, you could do this, but there may be some logistical or ethical challenges or problems that you need to work through. And again, we can talk through those as needed. The Cprb did discuss the city attorney's memo. The minutes from that meeting are also in your packet. There was not a vote taken on what to do. It wasn't a firm recommendation forwarded up to you. From my read of the minutes, it seemed like the majority of the commission did not want to advance those further. There was at least one commissioner that indicated an interest in trying to challenge state law in some way, shape, or form. I'm not exactly sure what that would look like, but you can see that conversation summarized in the minutes. So what we have left for discussion tonight is a firm resolution on the 5 items that basically have conflict with state law, and then there are 4 additional items hanging out there. 2 of them are back in our court when we can decide if we want to move forward on those, and then 2 of them are still in the Cprb court. So just to put the other 2 aside, the Cprb is still working through their budget request and also working through the logistics on how a social worker or medical professional accommodation may be provided to complainants going through the Cprb process. It does appear that they have moved on from the idea that the city would provide an attorney for the complainant, and they're solely focused on the social worker or medical professional aspect. So that'll come back to you. But in the meantime, we can discuss the 5 aforementioned recommendations that have a conflict with state law. There's also a recommendation to expand CPR membership from 5 to 7. And some details on how the CPRB envisioned that are in their original memo to you from December of last year. And then lastly, the CPRB still wishes to have the authority to hire an independent auditor at their request if they deem that's necessary. This was one that the council had kicked back to the CPRB for some more discussions with the police chief. The chief is here tonight and can kind of talk you through what he shared with the commission, which is a lot on the department's accreditation process. It's the CALEA accreditation process, which is essentially an independent audit that takes place every year and every 4 years with an intensive on-site focus. So every 4 years you have an intensive review of department policies and compliance with those policies, and then every year on a more remote basis there's compliance checks that go on with that. The CPRB acknowledged that existed, but also felt that they may encounter a situation in which an independent auditor may be needed to essentially review those same policies and compliance with policies. So that's kind of where things stand. I'll turn it back over to you if you've got questions on the CALEA process. When you get to that item, the chief is here, and of course Eric is best to speak to the 5 remaining issues that do have some state law conflicts.
Thank you. So I wonder if we'll start with kind of the 5 that the city attorney kind of said that it's really a state law. And that is items number 1, 2, 3, 5, and 12. Maybe I'll just open it up to council unless we want to go ahead and have Eric go through them. Go right ahead.
I think from my perspective, it might actually be useful for the city attorney to walk us through them, and maybe he could walk us through one at a time and then we could discuss it.
Sure.
So we can come to a conclusion so that we're sort of
Sure.
focused on the legal reasoning.
All right, great.
Sure. Okay. So those numbers again are 1, 2, 3, 5, 10, and 12. 10 being the attorney or social worker. And that's the one that's still kind of hanging out there a little bit. So I'll refer to the other 5 that are mentioned, starting with CPRB proposed change number 1. That's that in instances of a sustained misconduct complaint, the CPRB be given information about the corresponding discipline, and that the CPRB be allowed to include in its report its finding on whether the discipline is reasonable and fair. Like many of these, the problem with that is that it doesn't allow for the confidentiality of disciplinary records, which are, which is the law not only in our open records statute, Chapter 22 of Iowa Code, but also in Chapter 80F, which is the Peace Officer Bill of Rights. As mentioned in my memo, again, one such amendment prohibits law enforcement agencies from releasing complaints made against officers, reading as follows: the employing agency shall keep an officer's statement, recordings, or transcripts of any interviews or disciplinary proceedings and any complaints made against an officer confidential unless otherwise provided by law or with the officer's consent. Again, the underlying or one of the other underlying issues is that officer discipline under state law is under the authority of first the police chief and then the Civil Service Commission under Chapter 400 of the Iowa Code. Maybe I'll pause there to see if any council members have questions about that one before I move on to number 2.
So my only question is, when it talks about confidentiality, when the CPRB meets, they go into executive session so
Yep.
that no one except other than the CPRB members are discussing a particular issue.
Right.
And so I gather that doesn't count as confidentiality.
it doesn't count as disclosure or a violation of confidentiality. The other part of it is, of course, in the CPRB proceedings, the officers are identified by a number, not their badge number, but by an assigned number in order to preserve their anonymity. And so between those two things and instructions to the CPRB that they're not to discuss, you know, those proceedings and what they've, you know, received insofar as those reports, yes, we think it's consistent with state code, both Chapter 22, the Open Records Statute, and ADF, the Peace Officer Bill of Rights, to allow the CPRB to do their work, but not to have any kind of public, you know, revelation of those records. Does that answer your question, or have I danced around it?
No, I guess that answers my question, but I guess the other part of the question is then if they were, just so that I understand completely, so if they were to have access to other disciplinary materials, how would that contravene state law?
Well, because Chapter ADF, the Peace Officer Bill of Rights, says that, you know, discipline is to remain confidential. And if I understand the CPRB's request here, what they're asking for is that the discipline that's meted out against an officer be revealed to them, and that they would include it in their report, and then that they would further weigh in as to whether they feel that it's reasonable and fair. What the CPRB doesn't have now, and what they're requesting here in this proposal, is that the city, or the police chief in this instance specifically, would share with the CPRB what the police chief chose to do, you know, what discipline is imposed. And that's the real problem. The state law does not allow for that part of it.
They don't allow it because of confidentiality, you said, right?
Yes, that's correct.
But if they are not using the name and they're referring it to, like, with a number, for example,
Yeah.
and it's just, how that's not, like, really, it still is confidential because you don't know who we're talking about.
Well, perhaps, but the problem is that, and I can't remember if it was in this one or one of the other proposals that the CPRB made, where I offered a hypothetical in which a complainant, you know, was unhappy with the work of Officer Smith, and filed a complaint that Officer Smith had exhibited, and we don't have an Officer Smith, and that's why I'm using the phrase Officer Smith, was unhappy with the amount of force perhaps imposed by Officer Smith, you know, in June of 2020 and so forth, and then, well, you know, it turns out that's the only officer, and you know it's Officer Smith, and so now you know that Officer Smith is number 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, or whatever the assigned number is, and thereby you've lost the confidentiality as a result. And we don't have a ton of complaints to the CPRB, and so that's not a wild hypothetical. I think that that's probably likely. When you combine that with the possibility that there's, you know, news coverage for a complaint, and we've certainly seen that on a repeated basis, whereby the media would specifically identify the officer who's involved. You know, if we're assigning, you know, an anonymous number to that officer, it's still not going to be any mystery about who that is, and now you're going to be able to look to see what else that officer's had for discipline, and that officer's lost all sense of confidentiality, and that would be a violation.
But if the discipline report by the police chief that coming to the police review board is confidential itself, is not like disclosed to no one, and they will go in like a confidential session, whatever we call it, how that the public will know about it, so they can say, oh, that's the, for example, Officer Smith is a number here now on this complaint. You understand what I'm coming from? Like,
well,
if we make it like really that when we get the discipline from the police chief about discipline, what happened to that officer, if that part will be only confidential, not public record, is between the police chief and the CPRB only.
The report by the chief as to what discipline was imposed, is that what you mean?
Yes. And without even mentioning them, give it a number, and even at that point, it doesn't matter really, because this is not going to go to the public, as Jana said earlier.
Well, I think Yeah, I mean, based on the hypotheticals, and again, they're not wild hypotheticals, I think that would be, I think we would be found to be in violation, and because the city would be liable if we're found to violate Chapter 80F, the Peace Officer Bill of Rights, I think we would really be exposing the city to liability if we were to engage in any kind of disclosure of the discipline imposed by an officer, or by the chief against any specific officer.
But let me ask you this. I remember when I was, correct me if I'm wrong, Cully, sometimes they go to executive session, right? And that, like, during that session, everything is confidential, right?
Yeah, I'm sorry. I don't know if you're asking Kelly or me.
Yeah,
Yes,
I know,
when they
it
meet
doesn't
to
matter.
discuss, for example, the chief's report as to whether or not he finds that the allegations were sustained or not sustained and so forth, that's all in executive session. Yes.
Okay, same thing. If we are talking about that in executive session, why not the same thing coming from the police chief about the discipline? It will be in executive session also, so it's not going nowhere.
Well, because I think the difference between the chief's assertion that the allegation is sustained or not sustained is different than a disclosure of the discipline imposed. It's kind of the disciplinary records that are specifically protected. I mean, there are others as well, of course, but that is one thing that is clearly protected under state law. And so whereas I think that, as is presently the case, the chief can say, I think that Officer Smith, this violation is sustained, this allegation was sustained, this allegation was not sustained, and so forth. I think that's functionally different than to say, and as a result, I suspended that officer for 1 day, or something like that. That's really crossing a line that I don't think state code allows.
And just to be clear, these are only for, as far as the recommendations from the CPRB, these are only for sustained misconduct, right?
That's the way I'm reading it.
And we've had how many of those in the history of the CPRB?
No, I don't have those statistics.
Very few, right?
I think that's fair.
So could we know if discipline was imposed, just yes or no, without the contents of what that action was?
I don't think so. Yeah, I mean, I get that that's more quantitative versus qualitative, but you're still saying that Officer Smith got disciplined. And I understand that it's, Officer 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, but you're indicating that discipline had been imposed against that officer who hypothetically could be identified, and I think that would be a violation.
In the case where it may go before the Civil Service Commission, is confidentiality continued throughout that process also?
No.
Okay.
Civil Service Commission hearings are fully public. And so if the officer, the significant difference being here that that's an officer's appeal. The officer chooses to go to the Civil Service Commission to appeal discipline and so forth. And at that point, that's fully public. Because of course the whole nature of the discussion is whether the officer should have been disciplined, and if so, was that the appropriate level of discipline. But again, the significant difference is that that's an officer making that choice under Chapter 400. Here, the officer isn't given that choice. At least as I understand the proposal from the CPRB, they're saying regardless of the officer's wishes, we would send it to the CPRB for them to comment.
I just don't get that, like how the, like, between only the police chief and CPRB members, that still will be a disclosure of information. If it's like really between only those two parties, like police chief and the CPRB member during executive session, not like.
Well, I mean, it's a fair question. But, and I think I've probably answered that part of it as best as I can. But the other part of it is that, the disciplinary authorities under state law are the chief and the Civil Service Commission, period. And so the notion that there would be any legitimate reason for the CPRB to have, again, individualized, as opposed to just a broader idea of trends within the department and so forth, but individualized disciplinary information based on a specific officer I think would violate the, Chapter 400 structure of the chain of command and who has authority to discipline, and it's clear that the CPRB does not. I know that that's not what they're asking for here, but I think it would be hard to justify the release of this information to them, given that they have no control over discipline ultimately.
Okay, since you're using the word "I think," is there any way you can make sure by like reaching out maybe to the civil services and ask them if that's something will be?
Well, this is not my opinion alone. This was something that was staffed in our office. This was a memo that was started by my predecessor, Eleanor Dilks, and I know that she's in agreement with all the conclusions. So I want to be clear that this isn't me, just by myself, coming up to this conclusion. This is a product of our office discussions. I'm not sure who else I would ask, frankly, at this point. Although, I could certainly.
You said this is violation by the civil what?
I'm
the
sorry?
Commission? Civil. You said this is violation by.
Well, you're referring to the
Civil
Service Commission.
Civil Service Commission. The Civil Service Commission will consider this is a violation of the confidential.
Oh, I don't know. I may have misspoken. I don't know that the Civil Service Commission would consider it a violation. It would be a violation of state code because state code gives them the sole discretion to, after the chief of police, of course, to impose discipline and to hear appeals of discipline. Yes.
I don't know, but given the fact that CPRB is like a unique commission that is not being like in any state, any cities, I think it was some researches about whether disclosing discipline by the police chief to the CRB member and keeping that confidential is really breaking the state law.
Right. Well, I'm not sure I would characterize the CPRB as unique. I mean, many of the cases I cited in the memo are for comparable civilian review boards in other states. Denver and in New Jersey and New York City and so forth. So they're out there, and a lot of times their powers, again, are dictated by state law in those respective states. And again, for example, in the New Jersey case, it made clear that we got to follow the state law, and we're constrained by state law, and that resulted in a different outcome than in New York law because that review board actually did have authority to discipline the officers and so forth, and that was a significant distinction. Here they don't under Chapter 400, and so I feel pretty confident about the results. If you'd like, I'd be happy to run it by some of the other Metro attorneys to see if they disagree or if they think that there's if they have their own bodies that are similar. I don't know if they do or not, but it's with a strong degree of confidence that I've come to this conclusion.
I mean, it sounded, when I go back through your memo, you actually cite something that the CPRB itself said in their reports, that they had recognized that there's issues with the confidentiality of discipline records, and because they stated, careful consideration must be given to protect the confidentiality of information such as discipline information. It is understood that some legislative changes must occur to allow for a CPRB review to be an exception to the confidentiality laws regarding discipline information. So it sounded as if they and their attorney had already recognized that this conundrum exists.
I read it that way too. Should I go on to 2?
Yep.
All right, so CPRB proposed change number 2. The CPRB shall have the authority to request the City Council have a disciplinary hearing. This one is even more straightforward, but is based on the same root. That is, the chief of police, and after the chief, the Civil Service Commission, and the Civil Service Commission alone has that disciplinary authority. Even if the City Council wanted to have that disciplinary hearing, that would be a violation of state code. They could not. So this one's pretty straightforward. Moving on to CPRB proposed change number 3, that an accused officer be required to comply with a CPRB investigation or be disciplined by the chief of police and the city manager. Again, this would require a change in state law because of the CPRB's lack of authority over discipline. There's a whole body of case law regarding employee discipline and employees being forced to be interviewed and answer questions and to take part in investigations and so forth. And following the Garrity case and its progeny, I guess, political and legal compromise that has been met is this, that employers can force people to take part in investigations and answer questions so long as those answers can't be used against them in a court of law, in a criminal court, I should say, such that criminal charges can be filed against them. That's everyone's Fifth Amendment privilege. However, Chapter 80F goes on to describe the process pretty thoroughly in state code as to what an officer needs to do and doesn't need to do. And as a result, I think, as I mentioned, I think in the body, that I think the ultimate outcome of the CPRB, trying to take some of the authority to require officers to participate in interviews would just be the officers pleading the fifth every single time, and they would be entitled to do so. And I think as a result, it'd be a rather fruitless exercise. And there's nothing that we the city could do upon a failure by a police officer to cooperate with the interview. In the language I quoted from ADF.1 sub 16, which states that an officer shall not be discharged, disciplined, or threatened with discharge or discipline in retaliation for exercising the rights of the officer enumerated in this section. That section being the ADF regarding the interview process and the investigative process. So there's not, so I think it would be an exercise in futility to do anything here, because officers would just immediately plead the fifth, and that would be it, and there wouldn't be much we could do about that. All right, if there's no questions, I'll move on to proposed change number 5. The online database of officer complaints shall be improved to allow for quick searches of complaint history and a computerized risk management system to analyze trends. Again, this one has the same root of problem as the others. It involves the disclosure of confidential disciplinary records. And unlike some, for example, police investigatory reports, where there can on occasion be a balancing test imposed. What's the public's right to know? What's the public interest in this case? How important is this to the public discussion versus the privacy interests of the officer and so forth? When it comes to purely to the disciplinary records, there's no such balancing records as has taken place. There's been repeated and fairly consistent case law in the state of Iowa indicating, no, you don't get disciplinary records. That can't be disclosed. And so one of the, I see toward the end of my discussion of this one by quoting, again, the Peace Officer Bill of Rights, including some of the language that was added with the recent Back the Blue bill, which reads as quoted, "The employing agency shall keep all complaints made against an officer confidential unless otherwise provided by law or with the officer's written consent." Now, obviously, that last clause about with the officer's written consent would, in theory, open the door to some kind of gathering of data. But again, I'm going to state the obvious here by saying that I suspect that no officer would be willing to give their written consent to their disciplinary records being disclosed to any kind of database and made available to the public. And thus, again, I think you'd have an exercise in futility with that one. Proposed 10, I guess we were going to skip over that one. That's the lawyer and social worker one. We're still kind of waiting for the CPRB. As Jeff indicated, I think that they have moved off of the lawyer part, but are still kind of trying to decide, based on my reading of their minutes, whether they want to continue with the social worker part or whether they think they're going to be getting into therapy and so forth. So I won't comment further on that one, but that leaves the last one, which is proposed change number 12. CPRB complaints should be permitted whether filed anonymously or through third persons, so long as there is sufficient knowledge of the underlying circumstances. Here again, the obstacle is the Peace Officer Bill of Rights, talking about complaints made against peace officers. They have a formal definition of what a complaint is, and that means a formal written allegation signed by the complainant or a signed written statement by an officer receiving an oral complaint stating the complainant's allegation. And it's that second word, signed, referencing the oral complaint that was added recently that implies, well, it suggests through statutory construction clearly that that needs to be signed by the complainant. Obviously, having it signed by the officer who's merely writing down the complaint would be relatively meaningless. Obviously the legislative intent was for the complainant to sign it, because the other part of that is the protections given in the Peace Officer Bill of Rights, such that the officer can pursue civil action against complainants who have filed false claims against them. Obviously, if those complaints are anonymous, that would be a difficult complaint to make. But again, the state legislature has done some balancing of considerations and decided to, weigh it in this way. Obviously, as I said, I think in my memo, we might disagree with that decision at the local level, but we are, of course, obligated to follow state law, particularly in this case where failure to do so may result in our liability against or from complaints or claims made by our own officers. So I believe that was the last one that council had asked my office to review.
Any other questions for Eric or discussion on these? I think we can probably go one by one just to see what people's thoughts are.
I do have a couple of questions. So broadly, Eric, if you could just kind of describe the distinction, if you think there is one, between kind of the conversation or the explanation that you just provided as far as the city facing liability if we don't comply with the law, and compare or contrast that with the mayor's action to impose the mask order that just this last summer after the legislature's partial banning of that. Can you just explain that?
Certainly, and I saw that one member of the CPRB raised the same point, so I'm glad you raised the question so that I can address it. The contention was made that we were in violation of state law when the mayor issued his mask mandate. As council members will recall, that is not my opinion. I believe that we were in full compliance with state law with the mayor's mask mandate. Again, before, with the earlier mandate that the mayor had laid down previously, it had two components. One was that every individual shall wear a mask, again, except for various circumstances that were delineated in that first mandate and in the mayor's second mandate. The second component was essentially all owners of real property, all business owners shall not serve patrons or allow their employees to work without a mask, thereby imposing obligations on business owners and real property owners. Well, what the state passed in that law this spring was basically prohibiting local governments from doing the second of those two, but not the first. So we were no longer allowed to tell business owners, or in the language of that statute, owners of real property, to impose a mask mandate. But instead, we were just mandating that individuals do that. So there, in my opinion, we were not violating the law with the mayor's mask mandate. Here, if we were to do any of the things that we've discussed thus far, I believe we would be in clear violation of state law.
And then to the question of the disciplinary action and the very harsh restrictions on disclosing any of that, I just want to pull back and think about the purpose of the CPRB as some kind of mechanism for providing some amount of civilian oversight relating to our department, and the idea that there can be sustained complaints. And right now we have, I don't think, but maybe you can clarify, or maybe Chief can clarify, that if there's any correlation, even without identifying officers, between sustained misconduct and disciplinary action. Some anonymized understanding of whether the function of the CPRB relates to discipline of officers when there is sustained misconduct, I think is a pretty important policy understanding.
Right. I guess I'll say two things. First is that I certainly have not compared in any substantial way discipline imposed on peace officers versus complaints to the CPRB to look for the kind of correlation that you're describing. However, I am aware that the vast majority, having had worked with HR for the last several years, maybe 5 or even 10 years, I am aware that the vast majority of discipline imposed by police officers is not the result of a CPRB complaint. It is, self-directed within the police department, or may have come to, a less formal complaint, but had not gone through the CPRB. Again, I haven't actually studied that, but that's certainly been my impression based on my experience.
Would we be able to obtain even just and again, I think it's a very small number of those sustained misconduct complaints, but just to say if 12 of those have occurred in X number of years, of those incidents, 10 of them had disciplinary action.
Oh, that would give me great pause. Just because of the things I've mentioned before about the potential ability of members of the public to be able to identify officers based on the number, and they are fairly limited, I'm aware, of sustained complaints to the CPRB. I don't think I would be comfortable with that.
I guess I have a question just about sustained, and maybe the chief can answer this. When there is a sustained complaint, is it fair assumption that disciplinary action always accompanies that?
Chief Liston, Iowa City Police Department. If there is a sustained complaint, there is some sort of action taken. I think we're hesitant to say discipline or not because of the confidentiality, but there is some sort of, and then you guys know what discipline can range from a verbal counseling to termination. So if there is a sustained complaint, that means there is a violation of some sort of procedure and some sort of action would be taken, whether we consider that discipline or not. I don't know if it seems like the city attorney is uncomfortable saying that. I think there's an assumption that some sort of corrective action is taken. Now, that's why we don't, the CPRB gets the report on every complaint we get now. That's one of the things we've changed, whether it comes in through the CPRB, whether it comes in through the city website, whether it's generated internally through our supervisors. They get a report of every single complaint and whether or not it was sustained or not sustained. But it's, like we said, the officers are not identified, they're identified by a random number.
But my understanding is that when the CPRB members sustain a complaint, they already disagree with the police chief finding. So how you both are disagreeing, and it will be like discipline by somebody saying, I don't agree with you. This is my report. And that's what I find after I investigate the problem. That's what the police chief will say. And the police review board members will investigate and say, oh, we disagree with you because we think this is what happened. And after that, from my experience with the CPRB, we will say sustain, even though we disagreeing. The police chief say something, we said something, nothing happened. We will just submit it. And you saying like sometime will be discipline. I know that we send, when I used to be on the police road, we send like recommendations saying maybe we need training for that officer in certain, like some recommendation by the CPRB. I don't know how it happened now, but my understanding is all the time, like, I don't recall, you can tell me if there is one, but by discussing it with, as a member of the CPRB, I don't recall there is a time when the complaint is sustained, there is agreement between the police chief and CPRB. Always
No, I
disagreement.
think that's more common than the alternative, where the chief and CPRB agree on a sustained
Not
complaint.
cited.
It's very rare that the CPRB would disagree with the chief.
When
That is the most rare outcome that we've seen over years. And we have that in the report that we sent out last year, that's up on our website. We have kind of the percentage breakdown of all those different outcomes.
Yeah, but I don't want to talk about that here because that's not true, because I was being there, and what happened is we did not sustain a complaint, not because there is no, for this time, all the time the police was right, and we agree. Because the member who was serving in the police review board, it does not reflect that the community. The first complaint has been sustained when Roysan and I and another Latino person joined, so we become a quorum. That doesn't mean anything. I just don't want to talk about that here, but we know that there is many time both agree when it's not sustained. What I mean, when it's sustained, it never agreement on that. None of the sustained complaints so far has an agreement between the police chief and the police review board. If we talk about the few sustains that happen. That's what I mean.
So I have the stats if you want me to go through them.
I think you should. I think you should, because I think the public that's listening should have the facts.
What you saying? Couldn't hear
So-
you.
Again, this is referencing the report that we issued last year. So a 23-year period, 119 total complaints. The board sustained 16 of the 119 complaints.
When the first time has been sustained.
I can see if that's in the report. Half of the cases is in which they differed. So the police chief and the board reached the same disposition 93% of the time. So there were 8 times out of 119 in which the CPRB disagreed with the chief.
I guess I'm asking, when is the first complaint has been sustained?
I don't have that. It does not
Yeah.
appear that it's in the report.
Because it's recently started sustaining when we have people look like the community on the police review board. So let's be clear on that. We don't have to count this like as a percentage of 93%, whatever. That percentage, that means we don't have a lot of disagreement. That is not true, because before that, there is no complaint has been sustained, because there is no people on the commission look like the community look at this. That's what I really believe. And now when it start become sustained, because we have people who look like the community on that. Maybe we disagree with me on that, but that's what I believe. So we should count from now on. And the point I want to raise here, not like talking about what's going on the police review board. The point I want to raise here is those sustained complaint, always disagreement with the police, like with the police chief. Not like there is agreement on one sustained complaint. Like when the police review board say, this is sustained, the chief of the police, of course, he's saying different things. They are not agreeing in one of those sustained complaints. It doesn't matter how much they are, but they never been an agreement, so it will be discipline. I mean, if they agree, it will be definitely discipline, but if they are not agree, there is no discipline. That's what I'm gonna take it. How I'm gonna take it, I mean.
I have a question for the chief. When I sat on the board of nursing and a licensee would come before us with possible infraction, we had certain levels of standards that we followed depending on the severity of the incident. Do you, as administrative officer have those kinds of standards or guidelines that you use, ranging from, say, continuing education to leave without pay, those kinds of things?
Sure.
So if there's some consistency in your
Yes.
discipline?
Yes.
Okay, I have a question for Eric. You said that we was talking about how the police chief cannot disclose information to the Cprb because that's against the state code. Is there another something like the city manager, the city council, who else the police chief can disclose information about discipline without violating the state code?
Well, certainly the HR department has to keep those records of any discipline imposed. Is that what you're asking about?
Yes.
Discipline imposed? Yeah.
Who else?
So Human Resources Department would keep those disciplinary records. Certainly my office is, if discipline is being imposed, is probably aware of that. Again, depending on what it is. I mean, the chief had, indicated, the kind of full range of, corrective positions, being from, counseling and coaching versus, termination. We probably wouldn't be aware if there was, verbal counseling going on, but certainly would if there's a, suspension or something like that. I suspect the city manager's office would be aware as a supervisor of the police chief. I think that's about it.
If all those we know and we are the manager of the city manager, he cannot share those information with city council member?
I would say no. No, I would not say that he would share that with you. And for the reason being that there's, again, the state code lays out very specifically who has authority to overturn, or challenge that discipline. The chief is the one who makes the initial decision. Depending on whether there's a grievance or a Civil Service Commission appeal, then the Civil Service Commission appeal or the Civil Service Commission would have the voice. That can be taken to district court. We're there now for our last one, where a police officer was terminated. He went the course of a Civil Service Commission appeal. He was not successful and has appealed to district court, but nowhere in that chain of, I understand what you're saying, because of course the city manager works for you, the chief of police works for the city manager. I get all that, but the state code makes it clear about who has that disciplinary authority, and city council is nowhere in that link.
But for example, if the person who been disciplined for any reason took the city to the court, the city manager can come and disclose that to us?
I'm sorry, if someone appealed like a disciplinary decision to the district court, I think probably what would happen is our office would alert you, probably in a confidential memo.
Yes. Okay, but that's okay, but not like, if it doesn't went to that point, it's supposed to be, not sharing with the city council.
Well, because if there's litigation filed against the city, then we feel it's important that the council know, and so we would share that with you. It would be in a confidential memo, like I say, and in that point, you would not be in a position to determine whether that discipline should be enhanced or reduced. It would just be, at that point anyway, letting you know we've been sued, presumably for some money. Here's our stance on the case, that kind of thing.
Last question, and I will not talk. Even through a confidential memo, he cannot tell us whether there is a discipline or not. That would be violation of the code, even if it comes to us through a confidential memo.
Yes, I would not. And again, outside of the context of litigation filed against the city, I would say no, that would be a violation.
Okay, thanks.
I think there can be lots of different views on state laws, obviously, whether we agree or disagree, whether it's, these related to peace officers' Bill of Rights or anything else at the state law. But I do think as elected officials, when we look at the liability of the city and protection of our staff, it's our obligation to do the best that we can to follow that law. There may be times that you would want to challenge a state law, but I think when it comes to the confidentiality of our personnel and their issues, I think it's important that we follow that. And with the years I've spent on this council, I've had the utmost regard for the professionalism and knowledge of our legal staff. And based on, looking at the requests of the CPRB, looking at the analysis done by our legal staff, I'm in support of following the recommendations of our legal staff on these.
I think given that even the CPRB noted the challenges at the state level, that it was it was clear that there is some limitations placed on the city of what we can do as city council. And so I am going to be in agreement with 1, 2, 3, 5, and 12, that we don't have that ability to give them further authority or access.
I agree.
Yeah, I certainly agree for now. I do think it may be something that we revisit. I don't really have a time frame in which to revisit, but insofar as, some of these opinions were based on issues related to state law, those are facts that could change over time. So I certainly hope we can, be mindful of that. And, as these things unfold, and, again, looking at, in my mind, what's the trajectory of the complaints and those that have been sustained? I know that we're kind of focusing on, the proposals of the CPRB, but as a member of City Council, one of my main concerns is trying to understand the nature of the complaints, the pattern of those complaints that are sustained. For example, in revisiting this restructuring the ICPD document, there were 6 types of calls for service that were identified. Is there any pattern related to those 6 types of calls for service with regard to complaints against the ICPD? Is there a preponderance of complaint that occurs with certain types of actions and calls for service? And I didn't really see that in the restructuring document in terms of, yes, in fact, it's when this type of call for service is initiated that we see the largest percentage of calls for, or complaints generated by that action. So my goal would be, how can we come as close to zeroing out on complaints and sustained complaints as possible? And I do think, we are making, I think, headway on that with trying to understand what are the best situations in which to place our police officers so they and the public are at the least risk. We've talked about, bringing in medical professionals, for example. I wouldn't be surprised if some of these complaints about police behavior were associated with that type of interaction. So to the degree we can get our police officers working in the right situation with the least amount of risk to themselves and to the public, generating the fewest number of complaints, that's what I'm shooting for. Mm-hmm. We certainly at the back end, when things go badly for whatever reason, that's what we're discussing tonight, sort of the downstream of all these activities, these interactions that our police officers have with the public. But, I think the restructuring was trying to go upstream and say, what can we do to make sure we establish a better relationship with our community?
Yeah, thanks for framing that way, John. I think that's really important, especially as the CPRB recommendations that kind of sought to insert city council in the process, and where we, at least I am not in favor of overtly attempting to violate state law. I don't think that's a good idea. I do think we need to be creative in looking at, to what end, right? What is the intention of trying to understand better whether there is discipline that occurs in relation to complaints or why complaints are occurring in the first place. And, you know, keeping that, the plan in mind and the idea that we've talked about of the continuum of response and preventing and diverting and making sure that the government response to calls matches the need, I think probably would help with some of the complaints. And I also think that, you know, we should be looking at what is within our control, like the collective bargaining agreement that we have with our bargaining unit, as well as those parts of the city code, you know, and the policies that go through the CPRB and make their way up to us as well. So I think, you know, we just need to identify those places where we can have that influence and make sure we're keeping that overall goal in mind.
Laura, I'm glad you mentioned the union and bargaining units, because our law enforcement officers are represented by a union, and I'm sure there are some very strict guidelines out there as far as when it comes to discipline. And we would need to know those, and the CPR would need to know those. And I just think that they're not set to understand those kinds of rules and guidelines, and we aren't either. We haven't been trained in any sort of administrative guidelines for discipline, and I wouldn't want to be put in that situation.
And I agree with both Laura and John. Really appreciate the points that you made. The one that I would add, and I think that Eric alluded to, is a number of the provisions that were written into the so-called Back the Blue law this past session were specifically aimed at curtailing our ability to act, at curtailing our ability to do the sorts of things that CPRB wants to do, that we would like to do. So we have to sort of back off and say what space is left for maneuver, because they're working very hard to reduce that right now, and intentionally so.
The last thing I'm going to say, I think no city council will have like really the intention to break the law, but yes, challenging the law sometimes it's worth it, and that's why we have somebody like the city attorney, Eric, so he can tell us how can we challenge it in a legal way. So same thing like the mask mandate, the way that you just phrase it, and all the time we're going to be asking you questions to try to do something in favor of our residents and the city. But of course, at the end of the day, I've been asking all these questions, trying to figure out, like, is there a way, is there a room, we can do this, we can tickle things in and out, because I know you can, sometimes you have those kind of experience like this, like the mask mandate, and how you just make it a way that it will benefit our residents, in the same time we're not breaking the law. So I think all the time there is a way we can challenge, state code that we don't like. We can do that as long as we are not breaking the law, and I think that's exactly why we have a city attorney, so he can guide our way through doing that. Last thing I will say to the police chief, I think since we don't have anything in our hand, we are not going to break the state law. But hopefully, you will work as close as with those CBRB, because they try to improve our community. We're not going to ask you how to discipline somebody, but I think not everything has been written in the law. That's why sometimes we use the heart of the law. So work with them, and if there is training needed to our police officer, why not? If we wanna, because I think your goal, I know that your goal is to improve everything in the city that it needs to be improved, like regarding the police department. I hope you continue doing that. Thank you.
All right, so it seemed like we have consensus to, there are no changes we can do to 1, 2, 3, 5, and 12. And so we will just have, we'll just probably respond to CPRB and just let them officially know that there is no changes there. We're going to go on to the next 4 recommendations. awaiting some final discussion by council. That is number 8, 9, 10, and 11. I want to maybe bring up 9 and 10 first, and then we'll go to 8 and 11. So number 9 is to provide CPRB funding to promote awareness. And then the city manager's report did state the status was awaiting further CPRB details related to a budget request. So my proposal is that we just kind of reiterate that we would like them to make a budget request to us for further examination. Any comments on that one?
I mean, I'm definitely positively inclined toward anything that can get the word out in any ways, in any way that's effective to different parts of the community. So that, I mean, I think we could indicate that that at least from my perspective, that it's a forward-leaning. Please give us what you're looking for, as opposed to we're looking for a reason to say no. I think we're sort of looking. My personal sense is I'm looking for a reason to say yes. I just want to see what it is that you want to, what funds you want, and what you want to use them for.
Mm-hmm.
I agree with that. I think they got to the point of saying even cupcakes would be $1 each. I don't need anything quite that specific. I think maybe what Janice is also alluding to is give us a budget figure, and so much of this would be used for the business cards. So much would be, and I do like their idea that they should have more forums, public forums, and they can have a guesstimate of how much. They don't have to tell us, well, we need 750 for this and 650 for that, just a global figure, so they don't need to do the tedious work of itemizing things. Just give us a ballpark figure of what you think you would need, and I would be in favor of it.
I agree too.
I would also expand maybe their thought process to be some of our existing agencies in the community that could have literature. And so just, sharing that these are some places where it can be placed. And I would agree. I think that to promote it is going to be very beneficial. So then we'll just ask them for a little more information as to what their hopes are.
Yeah, and I know it's always complicated cooperating with other municipalities and so forth, but if this were something where it were possible to cooperate with Coralville, for example, didn't they just create one?
They
so
did.
that information for both of them is on whatever the material is? That could be helpful for people as well.
I almost wonder if we couldn't start with our own communications department and maybe ask them to make some recommendations, because they're already doing this on so many levels, especially our human rights department, just to see if they have some recommendations that can give the CPRB some standard guidance.
Yeah, we've assisted with that before. We've created videos on this topic. We've disseminated information out to different parts of the community, different organizations. So we'll continue to provide that support.
Do you think it'd be helpful if the CPRB was aware of kind of the outreach plan and see if they wanted to enhance it?
That's part of what they're putting together.
Okay.
They wanted to develop their own outreach plan, but we can certainly supplement it and assist. I think we've done that throughout their existence.
Okay. All right. Any other comments? Moving on to item number 10. Provide complainants access to a social worker medical professional. And the status on this is awaiting further CPRB details related to the social worker medical professional accommodation. And at this time, we're just really waiting for them to come back with some more information. So, and that's what we'll just ask or just state, unless there are some more comments. On to number 8, provide CPRB authority to hire an independent auditor. And the status here is that the CPRB refined the recommendation, and it is awaiting our consideration for this item.
So again, on this one, I think the discussion that took place at the CPRB was on our CALIA accreditation process. And if it would be helpful for the council to learn a little bit more about that, Chief Liston can explain what's all involved. But CALIA is essentially an internal audit that takes place. The decision is whether to allow the CPRB to do an extra audit on top of that.
Chief Liston, Iowa City Police Department. What Jeff was mentioning was the CALIA, and that stands for the Commission on Accreditation for Law Enforcement Agencies. It's an organization we've been involved with since the late 90s. And just this last spring, we got our 7th accreditation award. And what it is, and forgive me while I read this so I don't misstate it, it was an organization created in 1979 as a credentialing authority through the joint efforts of major law enforcement executive associations such as the International Association of Chiefs of Police, National Organization of Black Law Enforcement Executives, National Sheriff's Association, and the Police Executive Research Forum. And the purpose of the accreditation program, which is what we've been involved in for over 20 years, is to improve the delivery of public safety services by maintaining a body of standards developed by public safety practitioners that covers a wide range of up-to-date public safety initiatives, while also establishing and administering an accreditation process and recognizes professional excellence. This voluntary accreditation process begins with a rigorous self-assessment requiring a review of policies, practices, and processes against internationally accepted public safety standards. This is followed with an assessment by independent assessors with significant public safety experience. Public feedback is received to promote community trust and engagement, and structured interviews are conducted with select agency personnel and others with knowledge to assess the agency's effectiveness and overall service delivery capacities. At least one member of the current CRB participated in the latest CALIA accreditation process. And again, as I mentioned, Iowa City began the accreditation process in the late 90s with the initial accreditation awarded in March of 2002. And we received our 7th accreditation in March of this year, and it's an ongoing 4-year process that culminates with the accreditation decision by a 21 commissioner panel following a public hearing and review of the documentation. There are only 10 other municipalities in the state that are accredited by CALIA. So it's an ongoing 4-year process that we've been participating in for over 20 years that audits our policy, makes sure we're following the best practices and we're actually following those policies. In addition, just recently we've contracted with a company called Lexipol, which is we're embarking in a policy rewrite that'll coincide with our city website, our new city website, and that's to make the policy more forward-facing and more user-friendly to the public. And this will contain updates based on recent law changes and case law. So we're having an organization help us do that. Most of I think almost every law enforcement agency in the county already uses Lexipol. A lot of smaller agencies use it because they don't have the mechanisms to write policy on their own. We've had a pretty decent policy, but we thought we had some gaps in the policy that we could address with this Lexipol organization. So I just wanted to give you an overview of what CALIA does and what we're doing with our policy, just so you know where we're at. And I'm happy to answer any questions.
Sounds like there are none. Thank you. Great. All right. So what are thoughts on this? It does, at least for me, it appears that it's every 4 years that we're kind of getting this review, or?
We're given the formal award every 4 years, but it's a continuous process. We send proofs of standards consistently.
Okay.
It's an ongoing process.
Yep. The CPRB request was for a regularly scheduled independent audit every 1 and 2 years at the CPRB's discretion, and it would provide an opportunity for the police department to receive constant review and recommendations for improvement that can be implemented in the interims. That's kind of what they stated.
Right, but then in the sort of summary of the various requests, it says the CPRB discussed refining the request to require that ICPD give the CALIA report to the board when received and to authorize the board to request an audit on an as-needed basis. And so then CPRB board redefined the recommendation? Is that?
Yeah, that's correct. In their July meeting, they refined the recommendation based on the chief's feedback on the CALIA process. So really what they're seeking is access to the CALIA report, the accreditation report, which is already a public document. So there's no issues there. And then their ability on an as-needed basis to hire an independent auditor if they believe they need one.
And what the independent auditor will be doing, I don't get that here.
It's procedure, ensure that the department is following the correct procedure. If they felt, I guess, that the department was operating outside of a normal procedure, they could presumably hire an independent auditor to check that.
For the department, okay.
So if we give the CPRB the authority to hire an auditor and an auditor conducts an audit and comes back with recommendations for changes, then what? Like what does it look like from that point? And I guess maybe to Eric, what are our limitations on making changes?
Yeah, that's pretty wide open because I'm not sure what if the audit is nothing more than, as Jeff suggested, compliance with our present policies and so forth, then I would assume that could be a public document and council can do with that information what it wishes. I assume it would be recommendations to either change policies or, make sure that we're doing a better job of training officers and complying with those policies, whatever the case may be. But it kind of depends on what the audit says and what CPRB recommends, we or you as a council do about it.
Yeah, generally most people are familiar with financial audits, and when you have findings on financial audits, they often are recommendations for training or separation of duties, maybe ways in which there can be more checks and balances in a process. So if they found that a process was not completed according to policy, they're going to make recommendations to ensure that next time it does follow, which could be another set of eyes on it, that thing. In my view, most of the findings in an audit are going to be kind of internal administrative recommendations to ensure compliance. I don't think the intention of the audit here is to evaluate whether the policy is appropriate. They're already doing that through their regular course of work when they review updates to our general orders. So it's not really seeking an analysis of our policies. It's seeking an analysis of compliance with our policies.
I have a question. How the CBRB will going to find out whether the department need an outside auditor or not?
I couldn't answer that. I don't know that. I think that's a big question for us. Like what may lead them to want an audit? I couldn't.
Yeah, I don't know.
I mean, through the complaint process, so if someone's going through the complaint
But you're
process,
saying
they
auditing-
have access to interviews and body cams and things like that, so they can.
But they have access to that already, and I think the police can provide all that to them to access it. How from just reviewing this will they can find out the departments really need an outside auditor to edit it or something like that? I think we should ask the police review board for more clarification on that. Because I really don't understand how they're going to find something out there so they can ask for outside auditor.
I guess for me, if there was a concern where they needed an auditor to come in after they've seen the CALIA report, my assumption is that they can. I mean, I hate to put the council at front of everything that they want to do an audit for, but my assumption is that's something they can request during that time to council and state their claim that there is a concern. Because my assumption is there would have to be an identified concern for that audit to take place. And so instead of saying yes, just do it free reign, maybe they would present that to council, and then the council can at that point, make decisions.
I think so, yeah.
So I have a question for, on this for Chief Liston, which is during the CALIA process, or since it's an ongoing process, if the CPRB or anybody else would identify something that seemed, that it were not proper procedure, is that something that can be brought to CALIA as part of that process to take a closer look at?
Yes, and they are invited to participate in the process. One of the members did participate in the last process. Some of the members, I guess, weren't able to participate, but one of the members did participate in the interviews, and they can certainly bring up any concerns they have to the outside auditors.
Yeah, some of you council members, I don't remember who's participated in the past, but we usually would invite council members to meet with the accreditation team too, and I always do those interviews as well. And it's always, the first question is, what concerns do you have? Have there been issues where you feel, we need to really dig deep into? They're basically looking for leads going into that process, and so they seek to kind of cast that net wide. They do public surveys, they do public hearings, they'll meet with council members, we invite CPRB, and they're open to meeting with anybody. And that's the whole point of those discussions, so that they can make sure they focus on any issues that are raised by those various stakeholders.
And how did you choose who talked to them?
Well, again, we invited CPRB members to say who wants to do it, and we had a volunteer. We invite council members to do the same. We invite the public through media releases and social media posts to do that. And I believe, is there a survey component to it, Chief?
There is, and they will randomly pick members of my staff that they want to talk to as well.
Okay.
Yeah, I would agree with the mayor that, this would always be an option for them to make this request if they saw, a major reason. I have a concern actually with the way they have worded it and what their understanding is of what an auditor might do. I mean, they asked basically to have the authority to hire an independent auditor if the CPRB believes there is an immediate procedural issue that cannot be reconciled through other means. An auditor, in my experience, is not going to reconcile anything. They are going to look at things and ask questions and gather information and provide a recommendation. But they can't reconcile anything that that couldn't be reconciled through other means. So I just am not quite sure that they could, like Jeff said, when you have a financial audit, they can make recommendations based on things. And I think to leave that option open, obviously they could come back to any future council and request if they saw some major reason. But I don't see putting it in here where it's kind of a carte blanche that they could do it any time without getting authority for having some specific reason for it.
I would say that given the fact that they'll have knowledge of when that'll be coming, they could, as a group, CPR group, say this is, take a time out and say what are some important issues that we want, researched, and I think they can maybe make that claim for further investigation and whatever items they found to be priorities. So that's another, option that seemed like it was in the individual CPRB members coming, but the CPRB could do it as a unit, make a recommendation for investigation. Any other thoughts on this?
Well, this is a little confusing, but it does seem, in looking at this kind of matrix, it talks about, they've refined the request that would require the ICPT to give the CALIA report to the board when received, and to authorize the board to request an audit on an as-needed basis. So it's not something they're really asking to do necessarily on a regular basis, but on an as-needed basis. So I'm okay with that. I mean, it does seem that it's based on a review of the CALEA report. It's not something that they would necessarily schedule in any regular manner. But should they have concerns upon seeing the CALEA report, that they would be authorized to request an audit on an as-needed basis. You know, I'm okay with that.
But I don't think that's what it's saying.
Yeah, I don't think that's,
Because they modified it again on 713 in the left-hand side of that matrix. And there, it's saying that they would have the authority
Oh.
to hire an independent auditor. They wouldn't have to request authorization. They would have the authority to hire.
yeah, and I don't think it's tied to the CALEA. I think they basically said the CALEA thing is, nice, we want to see that report. But if circumstances outside of that, not necessarily because of the report, but outside circumstances dictated, they'd want to hire an auditor, an auditor.
I wonder if this relates to their budget request. I mean, it feels like logistically, if they were hiring an auditor, it might be a contract that would have to come before us anyway, depending on the scope and the terms of it. I mean, maybe it's something that they would want to propose, kind of figuring that out and throwing numbers in there, because I'm not opposed to the idea of an independent body being able to, at some point in time, sort of look at the process, even in relation to the CALEA process. But I don't, it seems like there could be a point at which it would be either redundant or, not actually leading to policy improvements or procedural improvements. I don't know what other counselors think about that, maybe asking the Cprb to scope it a little bit as to what they have in mind for this independent auditor.
Yeah, because I think also sometimes I believe they referring to a 13 investigation, or this is just in general for the whole department. I really did not get exactly what they are referring to for editing.
Well, we heard Susan Mims just talk about an immediate, right? You referred to something more immediate.
Well, I mean, if you look at the grid on page 46 of our packet, all right, then the bottom of page 46 is item number A, and they started out, and their first request was to be able to the authority to hire an independent auditor to review the police department's internal investigation procedures. It was a very narrow focus of what they wanted to be able to hire an auditor for. If you look on the right-hand side, we requested more information. It signed back. They made a change. They talked about CALEA. They modified it by the board again on July 13th, and that is in the bottom left-hand side where it says now that what they want is the authority to hire an independent auditor if the CRP believes there is an immediate procedural issue that cannot be reconciled through other means. Mm-hmm. My perception is an auditor is not going to reconcile anything. They're not going to solve any problems. An auditor is going to look at what is happening, make their recommendations on what should be changed, what issues there are, and bring that to the forefront, but they're not in a position to actually make changes or reconcile anything. So I again would go back in support of what the mayor mentioned earlier, is saying to them, hey, anytime that you think there's a major issue that's not being addressed by staff, by CALEA, whatever, then come to us and let us know and make that request that, hey, we really feel we need an outside auditor or body of some sort to come in and look at things. And this council would hopefully always be open to that kind of request if there's justification for it.
Yeah, I'd also point out that I am a liaison right now with the CPRB, so if they, anytime I've had some people from them call me about issues, if they feel that there's an issue, I would certainly and they talk to me, I mean, there's plenty of other channels, but if they talk to me as liaison, current liaison, I would definitely bring it to you, Mayor Pro Tem, and others to start to try and flesh it out and see what's happening.
But I really
Be
think
resolved.
that, go ahead. Yeah, there is like two things going on here. Sometimes I hear it like auditor, sometimes investigator. And I think it worth to ask them what exactly they're referring to. Do they need somebody to investigate certain, like problem that happened, or they need editor to edit the whole department and give them recommendation how to improve? We need clarification on that so we can understand exactly what they are referring to.
I do hear, kind of the auditor versus investigator, language that you bring up, but here they are specifically saying auditor.
Mm-hmm. But on the beginning over there, they say to investigate certain,
Internal investigation procedures.
yes,
Yep.
internal, yeah.
But again, they still were talking about an auditor. It was just they
No.
were a very narrow focus of what they wanted the auditor to look at. I mean, I think we sent this back to them once already, and this is, they've discussed it and, refined it on June 8th and refined it again on July 13th. So to me, we're at a point we ought to
No, is
act
it-
on what we have in front of us.
Do we have a timeline for this?
No, we don't have a timeline.
Can we ask them that question?
Yeah, I would be interested in their response to the mayor's proposal.
To make sure we give them the right,
I would be interested too, because perhaps they misunderstood what an auditor truly is and what their role would be.
So do you think we can give, the direction of if you would like an independent auditor, one, you have the liaison,
yes.
as well as that can come to the council.
Mm-hmm.
Are we comfortable with that? I mean, they'll still make their response.
I still think they could put it in their budget if they think it's something they're gonna do.
Mayor, they are coming back to us for budget. They are coming back to us for another thing, right? For the emergency.
Right,
Medical
they have a
wristband.
couple of other issues on
Yeah,
the budget.
they
One
can
is-
come back with this too.
So I want to make sure that I have a clear understanding of where the majority is here. I did hear that it can go in the budget. They can put it in their budget, which I think they can still submit a budget independent of what we decide on this one item. Do we then, just state that if they want an independent auditor, that they present it ultimately to council for final approval?
I would suggest if they want an auditor, they present it to council. The issue I would see about putting it in the budget is I don't think, unless you know what you're auditing for and what you're really looking at, I don't think you're going to have a clue what your budget needs to be.
That's what I was hoping they might know, that we don't.
I mean, if it's something fairly narrow, then you might be able to get an idea of what it's going to cost you. But the broader that audit is, the more it's going to cost. So if they have no clue right now, because they're just looking at this in general for the future, then I think it's pretty difficult to put a dollar amount into a budget that could accommodate it. So that would be my only concern about trying to address it through the budgetary process.
That's what take us back to ask them to notice their focus and tell us exactly what they mean by that, so we can see this is something to be put on the budget or not.
But also, the way I read it right now is I don't think they have anything right now, is the way I read their final thing. They don't have anything right now that they feel they need to audit, but it's something potentially for the future.
Mm-hmm.
If we said yes, they should have the authority to do this, would that be a change in their ordinance, like governing them, or what would that actually mean?
Well, the city manager has authority to hire a consultant. I believe it's up to $60,000. Is that right, Jeff?
Close, yes, I think. I don't know, I can't remember the exact number, but pretty close.
I want to say, I'm not certain either, but I think it's 60. And normally, boards and commissions don't have their own, I mean, unless it's a board or commission like the airport or library that's, quasi-autonomous and they kind of run the show for a department. Normally, boards and commissions don't have, spending authority to spend, a whole lot of money on much of anything. But yeah, I mean, I guess I'm not sure what's meant. If the idea is that they're given a budget line of, X dollars and they can hire an independent auditor to perform an audit of their specifications whenever they want, I mean, we can certainly find a way to make that happen. That may require a change in the ordinance. I'd need to review that, but if that's the council's will, I'm sure that can be realized.
I would just urge you, I wouldn't get hung up on the dollar amount, on the budget, whether it's in the budget or not. We've had to do special audits at the city before, and we have contingency funds and reserve funds to be able to do that. So I don't anticipate a situation in which there's no money available for an audit, all right? And because it would be irregular, it's probably just not something we would budget for on a regular basis. I would focus in more on, regardless of what their scope is, you can go back and get clarity. Is it on investigations? Is it on kind of department policy-wide? Regardless, if you want them to have that checkpoint with council, if you want to have that discussion with them before that audit is initiated, then that's kind of where it needs to rest. Just come to us if you have a concern, and we can help craft the appropriate audit if you want to proceed. If you truly want to give them the ability to act outside of council approval, that's probably where you'd need that clarity and that scope really well defined.
Okay, so since they didn't define the scope, I think our choice is to say, come back to us when you have a proposal. I guess that's where I'm landing.
And I think I'm comfortable for that right now, until we have our first incident that they want to investigate or have an auditor for. I'm seeing some shaking of heads. Okay, so we will just have them come to council with that request, and council will make a decision during that conversation with them. We're going to move on to number 11, which is expanding CPRB membership from 5 to 7. And this was a request where they were asking that at least 4 members be from a minority race, and at least 1 member be a current or former member of the police department or a police expert.
The one thing I would say about this one, Mayor, is I would caution against having explicit quotas based on race. The courts have made it pretty clear that that's not permissible. Certainly, we can include language to the effect that, life experience should be considered, diversity will be a consideration and a factor and so forth. But when you say explicitly at least this many members shall be of a minority race, I think that would leave us vulnerable to challenge.
I agree that the number should be increased. I think 5 is, that's a big challenge for them to do the job they've been charged with. And 7 would be great, I think. And I agree with Mr. Gears that perhaps just a suggestion on the membership, because as it is, it's challenging now for us. We try as best we can to be diverse on commission, board and commission appointments, but it's difficult. But I see this as going along with the public awareness one, where we're letting them have funds for that, for the CPRB. I think that members should maybe attend events, community events, and encourage people to apply for these positions. I think that would be the best way to go about this. And the brochures, the budget for brochures, they can be handing those out. So to increase the public awareness, and I think that goes along with this, is that would be great if we could have at least 3 be the minority members, but that's a challenge.
I would agree with increasing the number. I think with 5 now, what I would suggest, again, just because sometimes we have a challenge getting the applications of going from 5 to 7, and then reevaluate in a couple of years and look at, does it make sense to even go as far as 9? But I think having more people to do that workload and just to provide more opportunity across the community, I would agree with increasing the number.
I think they would benefit from having a somewhat larger commission, and if we can, at least include encouraging language for preferential or encouraging without requiring, because it's absolutely, from my perspective, it's absolutely essential that the communities most affected be represented, but we can't require that.
I think similar language regarding anyone with kind of the police background. I don't think it should be a requirement, because we might just end up with a vacancy or, be put in a position of appointing someone when, maybe they lack other qualifications. But I think having that recommended language, if that's what the CPRB is asking for, is good.
I do wonder if we could not have the specific language for at least someone from the law enforcement or a law enforcement expert.
Yeah, that would be fine, because that's not a member of a protected class. I mean, we have that in a number of other boards and commissions, Board of Adjustment, for example. That's fine.
And there's language referencing that in the current ordinance.
There is, yes.
There's already.
Because I know that that's their request, and so I
Yeah,
wanted to.
I don't think they were aware that that's already
It's already in there.
a preference. It's not a requirement.
So I think they're wanting to. I would take that leap and say make it a requirement. So I would be comfortable with that requirement, and then of course, when we're looking at all boards and commission, I think Mayor Pro Tem has talked about just making sure that it looks like the community, and especially as Councilor Minor just mentioned, a lot of the people that are affected are minority groups, and so just make sure that we are having that representation. So I'm comfortable going to 7.
The only question I would have is moving from the recommendation to requirement on somebody with police or police policy experience. What if you don't get any applicants? How long are you going to let that seat sit empty before you take somebody that doesn't fit that category? Because I think it's important that you have all the seats filled. And so, to me, in the 12 years I've been sitting here, I've felt pretty strongly that Council has really tried to do a good job in terms of looking at recommendations and preferences in terms of assignments to commissions and diversity issues, and obviously by state law now we have to do the gender issues, et cetera. So I think a recommendation rather than a requirement would probably go just as far, and then you don't risk having to set a certain date by, if we don't fill this position, we take anybody. So just my suggestion.
And I'm comfortable with the recommendation.
Yeah, I agree. The only thing I would say is that I can really see the difference from attending meetings between when they have someone with that knowledge, that background, and when they don't. So I would hope that Council would really take that into account when people are both recruiting folks to serve on it, because it's very helpful. It's incredibly helpful to have someone, just one person with that background to help inform the discussion.
Mm-hmm. So it seemed like we have a majority there.
Mm-hmm.
Any other comments?
So staff will draft that ordinance update. We'll send it to CPRB for comment before we bring it back to you.
Great, thank you. All right, we're going to move on to clarification of agenda items. I will state that for item number 7B, the Schmid, I'm going to ask our city attorney, to kind of just make a statement before we get into that item on the consent agenda during the formal meeting. Otherwise, any other item from the consent agenda? All right, we are on to info packet October 7th. We did get a letter from Pat Hyden with the Board of Supervisors about the fringe agreement policy. Did you want to speak to that?
Yeah, so there may be a small period where we don't have a fringe area agreement. There might be a little gap. The fringe area agreement is working its way through the planning and zoning process. So we've reached agreement at a staff level with the county. We have reasonable assurance that it'll be supported at the County Board of Supervisors and believe it'll meet your expectations too. So I wouldn't read too much into this. I just think we might have a short period where we don't have an active fringe area agreement.
Any other items from October 7th?
Only to comment that there was some really interesting information in the National League of Cities piece about sort of where different cities stand financially, who's using which funds for what, and so forth. That's
October 14th. A large part of that was the Cprb, so I don't anticipate there's anything else there. I do wonder if, I know we did have some minutes from the Ad Hoc Truth and Reconciliation Commission and our formal agenda. I do wonder if we shouldn't put them on our November 16th work session just to have a conversation. I know that they've been stating that, we haven't talked about some of the items related to them, and so I feel like we should have a conversation in a work session. What are thoughts?
We did schedule a joint meeting with the County Board of Supervisors at 4 o'clock that same day. So if you do want to add another topic that might be lengthy, we probably have to consider starting the work session a little earlier.
or move it to the 30th or whatever the date of the next meeting is, so that we don't have two big items.
Yeah, because that's going to be a big item.
Yeah.
Yes. We want to move it to the 30th. That's out there. But, okay, 11:30. All right, council updates. We did have our joint meeting yesterday. Yes. Joint entities meeting yesterday, and I think the most significant is that there are some cities, working on the ARPA funds, and they just kind of laid out what they're doing as far as public input, and I guess giving a general overview of where they are. So we reported as well. And we'll have our meeting with the county on the 16th of November.
Yeah, they're having their final public input session next week on the 27th, I want to say, 26th or 27th. So,
All right, anything else? We are adjourned until 6 p.m. All right, well, it is 6 p.m., and this is the City of Iowa City formal meeting, and we are at the Senior Center in Iowa City, and I'm going to ask for a roll call, please.
Burgess.
Here.
Mims.
Yes.
Sully.
Yeah.
Taylor.
Here.
Teague.
Here.
Thomas.
Here.
Weiner.
Here.
All right, welcome to everyone in the public that is in person or virtually. And we're going to start with some proclamations, which is item number 2. 2A is Change Your Clock, Change Your Battery Day. This is going to be read by our Mayor Pro Tem, Salih.
Whereas the City of Iowa City is committed to ensure the safety and the security of those living and visiting our city, and whereas fire is serious public safety concerns, both locally and nationally, and homes are the location where people are at greatest risk for the fire, and whereas between the hours of 11 p.m. and 7 a.m. are the peak alarm time for fire deaths, when people tend to be asleep, and whereas almost 2/3 of home fire deaths in the United States resulted from fire in home with inoperable smoke alarms or no smoke alarm, and whereas the designation of the special day to remind residents of Iowa City to change the battery in their smoke alarm time to coincide with the fall ritual of changing clock would greatly diminish the chance of this tragedy occurring in Iowa City. And whereas a smoke alarm should be replaced every 10 years, and whereas November 7, 2021 is the day for community members of Iowa City change their clock from daylight saving time to standard time. Now, therefore, I, on behalf of Bruce Teague, Mayor of Iowa City, do hereby proclaim November 7, 2021 to be Change Your Clock, Change Your Battery Day in Iowa City, and urge all residents to change their smoke alarm batteries, install new smoke alarm where needed, and to replace smoke alarm if they are 10 years old or older. And here to accept is our fire marshal, Brian. Yeah.
Thank you. Seen you a couple weeks ago at one of these council meetings, but this one it's a little bit earlier than when the actual date is. So November 7th is the day that we change our clocks, and then at the same time we change our batteries and our smoke alarms. I'm going to hit a couple of the big points off of the proclamation. 2/3 of home fire deaths result from fires in homes without a working smoke alarm. And there's many reasons why that could be. They may just be old. They may have taken it out to put in something else. There's multiple things that can happen. We do see that a lot when we go out. So we try to educate when we're out on the streets and going and helping people with making sure that they're having a good, safe living environment and place to be. Also, working smoke alarms cut the risk of dying in a home fire in half. So I mean that's very important to have one that works. Every fall we have this life-saving habit of changing and testing the batteries and smoke alarms and carbon monoxide detectors, because we don't want to forget those either. They're very important as well. One thing that you need to do when you're changing your batteries is take the smoke alarm down and look at the back of it. See what the date is. It should be stamped on the back somewhere there. The smoke alarms are a 10-year device, so we want to make sure that if it's older than that, we want to get it replaced. That way we know for sure we have one that's working right. Most of them will, if they do have a battery that's getting low, they'll have a chirp. If they go off for a fire, it's going to be a lot of beeps and really loud, but you may hear just like a little chirp, and that will go on every so often. That's letting you know that battery's ready to be changed. It's low. So listen for that and make sure that works like that. They do have different types of smoke alarms. One of them that's becoming most prevalent are the 10-year sealed. Those, we don't have to change any batteries at all, and they should last 10 years. But at the end of those 10 years, we need to replace them. When you do have smoke alarms in your house, it's best to have one in each bedroom, one outside of the bedroom, or the living areas there, and one on every floor. So if you've got a 2-story house, the second floor needs one, the first floor, and even the basement. With that, we just want to make sure that everybody takes care of this at their houses, and we do offer assistance to people who need it if they need help changing their batteries or smoke alarms. So that's all I have.
Great, thank you so much. Proclamation 2B is LGBTQ plus History Month. Whereas the path towards LGBTQ plus equality and liberation has been paved by courageous persons who have fought for the right to love and be loved, and their positive societal contributions of advance in areas of diversity, inclusion, equity, and respect deserve recognition. And whereas LGBTQ plus History Month celebrates and commemorates those who fought for equal rights and services for the LGBTQ plus community, and as a means of educating others, promoting a culture of acceptance and inclusivity, and advancing equality for all. And whereas the City of Iowa City is proud of its diverse community, committed to equality for individuals for all sexual orientations, gender identities, and gender expressions. And whereas today Iowa City endeavors to eliminate prejudice wherever it exists, recognize the multitude of identities that make each of us unique individuals, and envision a safe and inclusive world that allows all members of society to live openly and truthfully. And whereas in 1994, Rodney Wilson, a Missouri high school teacher and the first openly gay public school teacher in Missouri, believed a month should be dedicated to the celebration and teaching of gay and lesbian history, and gather other teachers and community leaders. They selected October because public schools are in session and existing traditions such as Coming Out Day and the first and second LGBT marches on Washington were in October. And whereas October 1st, 2021 marked the 27th anniversary of LGBTQ plus History Month, and whereas today Iowa City endeavors to eliminate prejudice wherever it exists, recognize the multitude of identities that make each of us unique individuals, and envision a safe and inclusive world that allows all members of society to live openly and truthfully. Now, therefore, I, Bruce Teague, Mayor of Iowa City, do hereby proclaim the month of October 2021 in Iowa City as LGBTQ plus History Month. And to receive this is Aidan Beltine, LGBTQ Iowa Archives and Library Director, accepting this. Welcome.
Thank you. My name is Aidan Bettine, and I'm the Executive Director of the LGBTQ Iowa Archives and Library. On behalf of our organization, I want to thank Mayor Teague and members of City Council for proclaiming October as LGBTQ History Month in Iowa City. LGBTQ History Month offers us as a community the opportunity to learn, celebrate, and share the queer history that has always surrounded us. Sharing and celebrating our past affords LGBTQ people visibility in the face of ongoing homophobia and transphobia in our broader community and state on one hand, while more importantly, providing legitimacy and representation for LGBTQ youth who need fierce advocacy, love, and protection. LGBTQ History Month invites us to reflect on how far our community has come and what we've survived in order to find ourselves and one another today. When we look to the local history of queer life in Iowa and Iowa City more specifically, we recognize lesbian, gay, bisexual, queer, transgender, non-binary, and gender nonconforming people as our neighbors, friends, teachers, family members, and engaged citizens, as people who have always or who have been ever present and integral to the formation of our city. LGBTQ history in Iowa has long been overshadowed by the history of queer life in urban centers on the east and west coasts of the United States. Proclaiming October as LGBTQ History Month in Iowa City is a firm commitment to acknowledging that LGBTQ people have always and will always exist in smaller cities in the Midwest, including ours. We will always make history worth celebrating during and beyond the month of October. Thank you.
Thank you, and I have the proclamation. All right, and the next proclamation is 2C, National Disability Employment Awareness Month, and this will be read by Counselor Pauline Taylor.
Whereas October 2021 marks the 76th anniversary of National Disability Employment Awareness Month, and whereas the purpose of this month is to educate about disability employment issues and celebrate the many and varied contributions of workers with disabilities, and whereas the history of National Disability Employment Awareness Month traces back to 1945, yet the unemployment rate of people with disabilities has consistently remained around 70% and thus represents an untapped talent pool. And whereas workplaces welcoming of the talents of all people, including people with disabilities, are a critical part of our efforts to build an inclusive community and strong economy. And whereas Iowa City is proud to have several organizations who are committed to educating employers and the community about disability employment issues and providing people with disabilities job coaching and assistance accessing quality jobs. Now, therefore, on behalf of Bruce Teague, Mayor of Iowa City, I do hereby proclaim the month of October 2021 as National Disability Employment Awareness Month and call upon employers, schools, and other community organizations to take steps throughout the year to recruit, hire, retain, and advance individuals with disabilities and work to pursue the goals of opportunity, full participation, economic self-sufficiency, and independent living for people with disabilities. Accepting this proclamation will be Jolene Sorensen from Systems Unlimited and Andrew Ostrut, who is an individual served by Systems Unlimited.
Welcome.
Hello.
Hi.
Oh.
Hi, this is Andrew Ostrut, and I am Jolene Sorensen. I'm Director of Development at Systems Unlimited, and we are honored here today to accept this proclamation. We want to thank you so much for identifying this as an issue across, as we as Iowans are facing a staffing shortage. People with disabilities have twice as high employment are unemployed, and so it's very important that we look at this as a resource and understand that the people that we serve are very much a part of our community and can really give back. And not only can they give to us, but we can give to them the opportunity to have the dignity of being employed. So we really appreciate today that you made this National Disability Employment Month. Thank
Great.
you.
Thank you both.
Andrew, I want to thank you.
The next proclamation is 2D, which is Public Health Professionals Day, also read by Counselor Pauline Taylor.
Whereas public health workers and professionals are an indispensable component to the health and safety quality of our community, and whereas the COVID-19 pandemic required an unprecedented response from public health professionals and took a physical, mental, and emotional toll on those individuals performing essential work in our communities. And whereas the American Public Health Association reports a shortage of public health professionals has been a growing issue in the United States, and surveys of these workers throughout the pandemic have shown increased burnout and desire to leave the profession. And whereas preventative, proactive, and professional public health education and services have been integral throughout this pandemic and will be even more important to respond to future public health crises in the future. And whereas the often thankless work of Johnson County Public Health throughout the COVID-19 pandemic has helped keep local governments, businesses, and the community healthy, safe, and informed. Now, therefore, on behalf of Bruce Teague, Mayor of Iowa City, I do hereby proclaim Wednesday, October 20th, 2021, as Public Health Professionals Day, and urge all community members to join me in honoring the public health professionals who serve us not just this day, but in every opportunity throughout the year. Accepting is Sam Jarvis in the audience?
Yes.
Yes, there he is. Accepting is Sam Jarvis from the Community Health Division.
On behalf of Johnson County Public Health, thank you. This is quite the surprise. I believe we intended to perform our usual, provide updates as we have done throughout the pandemic, and this is just thank you for this acknowledgement. Today is day 590 for those of you who are still counting, and it's just been such a long road for all of us in our community, but we appreciate the support and understanding throughout this entire pandemic. Pauline, what you read off today, it certainly resonates. It's been tough for a lot of us. We've definitely seen those reports. We've taken our own internal wellness surveys to assess our staff and the impact it's had on all of us. We know that our federal partners have noted that roughly we are short 80,000 workers across the nation for public health, and this is before the pandemic. And many of us have mentioned the whole way and at work that, boy, it would have been nice to have those 80,000 when this started. So we hope that as time goes on and our federal and state partners recognize that we can rebuild our workforce and prepare for those future pandemics. So again, on behalf of our director, Daniel Pettit-Majeski, and our Board of Health, thank you for this, and thank you for the acknowledgement.
Great. And you're also next on the agenda, so you can stay right there. One more picture. Yes. Great, thank you. So we're on to item number 3A, which is COVID update from Johnson County Public Health. And we're going to welcome again Sam Jarvis.
Good evening to the Iowa City Council, and as always, appreciate the opportunity to provide updates. As many have been tracking and noticed, we are seeing a decrease in our cases, which we're happy to see. Roughly the past 7 days, we've had low 200s reported to our department. And about a month ago, as we reported out, we were seeing close to low 400s. So we've seen that cut in half so far. We're happy to see the progress. We're happy to see that many are still complying and wearing masks, especially in indoor spaces. We continue to promote vaccines and provide either off-site clinics or provide the information so folks can make that informed decision. Across the board, we're also seeing hospitalizations decrease for our state, which is a good sign as well, too. We know our healthcare workers and hospitals are very strained right now. We continue to hear about staffing shortages and staffing issues, and so we know that we want to give our healthcare workers reprieve as well, because we know that we're entering a flu season, too, and we're unsure what that will look like. Many have coined as potentially a twindemic, and certainly last fall season, or flu season, we had noted that there was a concern for that as well. But we know that this flu season is different because our vigilance is different, and we all know and feel it. We know the fatigue is there as well, too. So we hope that the good practices and behaviors that we've all been practicing can stay in place, and that we can also curb flu transmission as well. In terms of our testing capacity, again, a huge appreciation to the City of Iowa City and to our other municipal partners and public libraries who have stepped up and provided access as a Test Iowa at-home test kit pickup site, where we've increased our access capacity to about 16 plus sites in Johnson County alone. And we know that testing capacity will be absolutely needed as we enter respiratory virus season. So for those who become symptomatic, we will continue to encourage and urge folks to get tested so that they know and make those informed decisions for work, school, daycare, and going about our lives as we continue on through the pandemic. In terms of our case rate, we are still within high transmission for our community. So again, following the CDC's guidance, we are continuing to urge and recommend that folks wear masks in indoor spaces. Roughly about 84% of counties across the U.S. are still in high transmission. We are seeing that decrease happen, but we hope that trend continues on and that we can eventually get to low transmission so that we can, one, be a little bit safer, and then certainly look at what future recommendations will be, which we hope, and many hope, that we won't have to be wearing masks in indoor spaces. But going into flu season, it would be prudent still to do these things. And so, again, we'll keep a pulse on that and report out if there are any new recommendations on that front. In terms of our total population vaccination status, we are at 64.3%. For our 12 and older, we are at 74.3%, and we are just passed by Buena Vista County. So huge kudos to them and congrats for having a higher rate. For much of the time, Johnson County has had the highest vaccination rate in all age categories, but we're happy to see that others are making good progress as well too, because that benefits all of us. The biggest news and what we're still waiting for, last Thursday and Friday, the ACIP met to discuss the Moderna and Johnson & Johnson vaccine data for boosters. And it sounds like it will be substantially similar to what the Pfizer recommendations will be for Moderna, but those have yet to be issued by the CDC and signed off by their director. So we await that information. So as soon as that is noted and sent to us, we will be sure to share that out with our community. But those are probably the major highlights at this moment. And then to report out on our 5 to 11-year-olds, we are just now receiving pediatric planning guidance from our state and federal partners. Excuse me. And we know that meeting for the ACIP is scheduled for November 2nd and 3rd. So we have a definitive date for that, and we'll be waiting to hear more on what that will look like. Because we know that at this moment, pediatric planning will be somewhat similar to what we're doing now, but in terms of logistics, there'll be some differences that we'll have to discuss with our healthcare partners and pharmacy partners. So, but other than that, happy to answer any questions or concerns.
Any updates on what schools are doing?
Yes, so I know that a handful of our schools are continuing to recommend masks. Not all are requiring. I will note that I believe yesterday on the joint entities meeting, our Iowa City School District Superintendent Matt Degner had noted that they've been able to implement a mask requirement, and that's produced positive results and everything, and that it has helped, one, keep cases and transmission low in schools, and that it's also helped reduce quarantine. So we would absolutely encourage all school districts to require masks in school spaces at this moment. We've continued to share that information. And we know that until that happens, we know that it's likely to be expected to have increases in transmission or small outbreaks in classrooms going forward. So, because as everyone is aware, many of those folks are still unvaccinated, at least 11 and younger. And it's a very similar kind of mindset with our daycares as well, too. We know that several of them have been impacted as well. So we'll continue to really encourage vigilance with symptom monitoring and mask wearing at this moment. So,
Great. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Yes. All right, we are at items 4 through 9, which is our consent agenda. Could I get a motion to approve, please?
So moved.
Second.
All right. Moved by Taylor, seconded by Weiner. I'm going to ask that our city attorney just talk about 7B, which is the South District SMID.
Thank you, Mayor. So obviously this is going to be a topic of great interest both to the council, I know, and to the public. And so there may be questions about why this item is only on the consent agenda as opposed to having a more substantive discussion on our regular agenda item. So I thought it would be helpful to kind of provide some of the procedure for how this goes to explain how this will work. So the city first receives the petition and ensures that it's legally sufficient. we've received the petition, and staff and myself have reviewed it, and it does appear to meet all the statutory requirements for a petition to move forward. Then council notifies the Planning and Zoning Commission. That's the item on today's consent agenda, because Planning and Zoning, are required to do an evaluative report and to make recommendations based on the merits and feasibility of the plan back to you, members of the council. So after tonight, you send it to the Planning and Zoning. They will do that, and then you will get their report, and then you will set a public hearing. Notice is sent via certified mail to all the property owners within the district, so that they're, obviously aware of what's going on. That has to be done at least 15 days prior to the hearing. Then, excuse me, council then holds that public hearing on the petition for the Schmid district. Council then, and this is what's a little different than other public hearings, council has to wait 30 days after the public hearing before before council can proceed with the vote on the district, on the ordinance that would implement the district. So that's the procedure, and so that's why, again, all we're doing tonight is just sending it to the Planning and Zoning Commission so that they can do their own report and send recommendations to you. Because council is not to have any, basically they can't do anything on it until we get that report back and the 30 days have passed and the recommendations from the Planning and Zoning Commission and so forth. It would be inappropriate to talk about the merits of it tonight. And so that's what's going on tonight.
I just have a question for you. You're saying like 30 days, wait period for the council. Is that because we might receive another petition, or why? Why we?
Sure. You would have the opportunity for, the public hearing would take place and so forth, and then it's possible that members of the public would reach out to council members and so forth, or they may want to have an opportunity to, run numbers, whatever the case may be. But unlike oftentimes where council has a public hearing and then votes that same meeting, that same night on an item, here the statutory requirement is that 30 days are passed in between. And again, I think to just kind of take it slow and just have another opportunity to make sure everyone can be heard and they can express their opinion to you as council members if they so wish.
Okay, thanks.
Any other questions on that, councilors? I'm going to open up this items 4 through 9 to the public. If anyone wants to come up and address any of the items 4 through 9, please do. Welcome.
Good evening, council. Excuse me. I have a question about 7C, which is the tobacco enforcement agreement between the city of Iowa City and the state. Whereas it looks like the state will pay the city $75 per compliance check, and if a permit holder is not found to be compliant in the first check, the city agrees to conduct a second compliance check. My question, if someone's in the know, to kind of further expand clarity on this issue, is it going to be Iowa City Police conducting these checks? And I guess my question is, what will these checks look like? If someone on staff could kind of expand 7C, I would appreciate that. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else like to address a topic that's within the consent agenda?
Well, yeah, I'm just going to second his comment that answering, who's going to be, is that going to be ICPD, or let's expand more on that.
Thank you. And we'll ask all participants that speak to sign in, please, and thank you. Anyone else like to address this topic, any of these items? Seeing no one, council discussion. Roll call, please.
Weiner,
Yes.
Burgess,
Yes.
Mims,
Yes.
Salee,
Yes.
Taylor,
Yes.
Teague,
Yes.
Thomas.
Yes.
Motion passes 7-0. We are on to item number 10, which is community comment. And this is for any item that is not on the council agenda. And individuals will be given 3 minutes to speak. The community period will end at 7 p.m. unless an extension is needed to meet a minimum of 30 minutes, which we are good on that front. And I will welcome everyone. We ask that you sign in, and there will be a clock right over here. Welcome. Please state your name and address.
My name is Mary Gravitt. I live at 2714 Wayne Avenue in Iowa City. I have my complaint is my yearly complaint about snow removal, especially the snow removal from the bus stops. When it seems like it's intent, the Bobcats or whoever's in charge pile up the snow at the bus stops so that when you step on the bus, you bring the snow in with you. Or they bank the snow up at the incline so that a person in a wheelchair can't get across the street. And at one time, we had to renew our permits, disability permits. It always had to be renewed in February, the worst month of the year. And how snow is cleaned up in the city. The service alleys are never cleaned and never salted, so that you can walk from the corner of Burlington all the way down past the library. But when you get to the surface, the public service alleys, you know, where the trucks make deliveries, it's always iced up. So you have to go out in the street, compete with the traffic, and get across the service alley because it's dangerous, because it's iced up. And furthermore, 1 year, they surpassed themselves about banking up snow at the bus stop because they banked up where the wheelchairs come on off Washington onto the curb, so that the person in the wheelchair just couldn't make it. And so what happened, if they were on the right side of the street catching the town crest, the bus driver had to go out into the intersection to let the wheelchairs on, let the disabled people on, let the passengers on, period. And this year is going to be worse with these new bus stops. It seems like the people, with the promise of Sunday service, they sold out their good service for a pottage, because we know how long it's going to be. And we need a sign where I live, no parking to the corner, so that the snow can be cleaned up. So it's a matter of, if Iowa City is truly going to be a city, you have to clean up the snow and know how to clean up the snow. It seems like the person's in charge of cleaning up the snow is from Florida, from Miami, and never saw snow and think it's nice and pretty. No, we got to get on the buses, and in the neighborhoods it's worse. Because I've had an event where a young man, he stopped his car to help me up on the curb because I couldn't get over the bank snow. So this has to be the last year for that. Clean it up, or hire somebody who knows how to clean it up. Thank you.
Thank you. Welcome.
Welcome. Thank you for having me here. Let me just pull this up here.
And please give us your name and your address.
Sorry, V. Fixmo Rise, 437 South Governor Street, and my pronouns are they, she, and shia. And you'd think I'd never done a presentation before. View, where's view? There we go. Funny. There we go. That's what I was looking for. Okay. Yes, so I am the CEO and founder of SDG Planning and the co-founder for RE Connect Collective, which we've presented before to you. And this year we worked with the Johnson County Affordable Housing Coalition, who was awarded a human rights grant. This is my company, SDG Planning, worked with Johnson County Affordable Housing Coalition. And we were basically in the Woodland neighborhood looking at how can we assist residents there in rental units with some of their housing. And so Sarah Barron from the Affordable Housing Coalition and Steve Knockazel from the Johnson County Navigator was there. So we did 2 events on Saturday, kind of like afternoon, and then Wednesday, early evening. And the reason why I bring this up is because we had food and we had games, and we were able to assist people directly. So we brought people to the people that can actually help them navigate systems and find resources in the moment. And so we worked with about 50 households, and 30% of those residents communicated in French, about 6% in Arabic, and we had a Spanish speaker, and the rest were English speakers. Many people came off the streets because we had a huge banner that said affordable housing resources. We had, the flyers that we sent out door to door. We worked with Southgate, who has the property, and they helped us flyer and send out emails to some of the residents, letting them know. The flyers were in several different languages, and we had translators there. And I bring all of this up because it was really powerful event to be able to come where people are. And oftentimes people came with, the flyer folded up to their language to say, I need assistance with housing. And I bring this to you because one example was a couple who has about $8,000 in unpaid rent. And through this one program, we were able to help them find resources to resolve that completely. $8,000 in back rent. We just did this event last month. So the reason why I wanted to bring that to you is because the collective is, we are doing the work in the community, just to give you an example, but also just to reiterate how urgent the need is to release those emergency ARPA funds. People are experiencing housing issues, food insecurity, all kinds of things. And we just wanted to provide you with that direct example of community residents that are just down the street. Thank you.
Thank you. Welcome.
Hi. Good evening. My name is Paola Jaramillo Guajara, and I am a representative of LULAC 308 Council that is with the greater Iowa City area, and I currently serve as their president. Our council is currently comprised of over 50 Latinx community members and allies who are striving to advance economic condition, educational attainment, housing, health, and human rights of not only the Latinx population in the United States, but specifically our area. And our LULAC 308 Council actually chose to join quite recently the Racial Equity Connect Collective to further advance the needs and desires of our local Latinx community. This community is rich with hardworking, underrepresented business owners who are eager to gain access to resources that they really truly need to thrive and build up their dream businesses in our community. They don't want to export them. They don't want to take them anywhere. They want to keep them here. They sell conchas, they cut your hair, they serve delicious tacos, and they sell artisanal goods to fill up your beautiful homes. They're our friends and our neighbors, and they deserve the support of the community to grow and prosper. I'm confident that the unique and collaborative work coming specifically from our Reconnect Collective will result in long-term positive impacts for members of my specific community for generations to come. We are excited at the prospect of partnering with the City of Iowa City to continue this important racial equity work, but understand that these ARPA funds hold the magic key. Thank you.
Thank you. Would anyone else like to address a topic that's not on the council agenda tonight? Welcome.
Good evening, Council. This is Dan Cobble again. I would just like to make a few comments about the work session that occurred earlier this evening. One of the astounding things to me, and the work session was about the Citizens Police Review Board recommendations that they provided to the City Council. Personally, there were several things within that really just kind of astounded me. One of them was focusing on a lack of transparency in regards to disciplinary proceedings for officers, not only from the public, but also from the Citizens Police Review Board. That is something that I think is extremely concerning, because I think these are the people who are in charge of making our community more equitable, safer for residents. I think that they need to be empowered to do whatever it takes to achieve that. Secondly, it was pretty astounding to me where there were several arguments about how some of the recommendations went up against state law and how the city could not go up against state law. That was pretty astounding to me, given that the city earlier this year has gone up against state law in regards to the mask mandate. And I know the city attorney described how the Citizens Police Review Board recommendations were different, but those explanations to me did not really amount to anything. I think it's an instance of the city picking and choosing which state laws it wants to go against and which it doesn't. And in regards to Councilor Thomas made comments about how the goal is to have 0 complaints. Well, I think in order to have 0 complaints and to have the citizens of Iowa City be happy, I think it requires a complete overhaul of the Iowa City Police Department. Because, I mean, if you look throughout the recent history, there are things that are major issues that the city has not worked to solve. And there are significant harms that are occurring to the community that I think need to be addressed. Another thing that was pretty astounding to me was I didn't realize that Iowa City police officers are unionized. Police unions, if you look at their role in other cities across the country, they have a very toxic influence on cities because police unions often get in the way of progress to keep citizens safe from the police. So yeah, thank you. Have a good night.
Thank you. Would anyone else like to address a topic that is not on the council agenda? Welcome.
Hello. My name's Noah, as you know. I live in Iowa City. Couple things. As I discussed earlier with y'all about the benches and picnic tables and stuff that's going missing, y'all should return those to where they were, specifically the one by Uncle Son, the picnic tables by Riverfront Crossing, to come to mind. Second is a Clue Workers Fund to actually fund the $8 million they're asking for from the city, instead of just dragging your feet waiting for the county to do that, to do that yourselves. You don't have to wait for the county. You can. There's nothing stopping you from doing that now. You're just choosing not to. Yes, just very simple accessibility things about how board supervisors allows people to call in on Zoom and have public comment like I'm doing right now, but your current policy is not allowing people to do that. And whatever, yes, you can contact you guys different ways, but that is not the same as what I'm doing right now, public comment that is being recorded live on there. That's not the same as if I was to write you an email, which is also public comment, but that's not public comment like this. What's happening right now is discriminating against people who are not able to come into meetings to give public comment like this, because, I mean, we still are in a pandemic, in case y'all forgot that. That still is occurring. People still are not able to go out to areas if they have health problems stopping them to come to public meetings like this, to give comments like this, and there's no reason whatsoever besides your choice not to allow that. I mean, the supervisors are doing that. There's no reason you are not doing that. That's a good reason. That's not discriminatory. You can't say it's not. You can try to justify that however way, twist the words you want. It doesn't change the fact that it's not the same. Okay, so you want to talk about stopping complaints and solving upstream problems and doing that within the law. Well, there was no law passed saying you can't defund cops anywhere. So if you want to solve the problem, well, the problem is the police, so defund them and put that money to services to actually help the community, instead of sending armed agents to the states to deal with every problem. Because when you have a gun, that's what you're going to want to respond with, is with force. And you can defund them. There's nothing, the Back the Blue law had that provision was not actually signed into law that you can't defund. You can defund them. So you should do that. I'm just waiting for time to run out.
Thank you. Anyone else like to address council on an item that's not on the agenda? Seeing no one, we're going on to item number 11, planning and zoning matters. 11A, zoning code amendment, form-based zones and standards. This is an ordinance amending Title 14, zoning code, and Title 15, land subdivision, to create form-based zones and standards consistent with the South District Plan. This is second consideration. Could I get a motion, please?
So moved.
Second.
Moved by Weiner, seconded by Burgess. Okay, great. And anyone from the public like to address this topic? Seeing no one, council discussion?
I
Roll-
guess sorry, Mayor, I just want to draw attention to the memo that was in the packet addressing the question about ADA accessibility, just so everyone is aware that under new construction, commercial uses are required to be accessible, which can be accomplished through at-grade entry, providing a ramp, or installing a lift, and that such options have to be compliant with the ADA and are reviewed at the time of the building permit or change of use permit. So if a new residential building was built under the form-based code and converted, it must also be accessible. So just want to make sure we were all aware of that, which is good news.
Thank you. Any other comments? Roll call, please.
Burgess,
Yes.
Mims,
Yes.
Salee,
Yes.
Taylor,
Yes.
Teague,
Yes.
Thomas,
Yes.
Weiner.
Yes.
Motion passes 7-0. We are at item number 12, Rochester Avenue speed limit. Ordinance amending Title 9 entitled Motor Vehicles and Traffic, Chapter 3 entitled Rules of the Road, Section 6 entitled Speed Restrictions, Subsection B entitled Exceptions, to modify the 35 miles per hour speed zone for Rochester Avenue. Can I get a motion for second consideration, and staff is requesting expedited action?
I move that the rule requiring the ordinances must be considered and voted on for passage at 2 council meetings prior to the meeting at which it is to be finally passed be suspended, that the second consideration and vote be waived, and that the ordinance be voted on for final passage at this time.
Second.
Moved by Mims, seconded by Taylor. Would anyone from the public like to address this topic? Seeing no one, council discussion. Roll call, please.
Mims,
Yes.
Salee,
Yes.
Taylor,
Yes.
Teague,
Yes.
Thomas,
Yes.
Weiner,
Yes.
Burgess.
Yes.
Motion passes 7-0. Could I get a motion to pass and adopt?
So moved.
Second.
Moved by Mims, seconded by Salee. All roll call, please.
Salee,
Yes.
Taylor,
Yes.
Teague,
Yes.
Thomas,
Yes.
Weiner,
Yes.
Burgess,
Yes.
Mims.
Yes.
Motion passes 7-0. We are on to item number 13, announcements of vacancies new. Applicants must reside in Iowa City and be 18 years of age unless specific qualifications are stated. Library Board of Trustees, 1 vacancy to fill an unexpired term upon appointment through June 30th, 2023. Applications must be received by 5 p.m. Tuesday, November 23rd. Could I get a motion to accept correspondence?
Move.
Second.
Moved by Solis, seconded by Burgess. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion passes 7-0. Item number 14, application, announcement of vacancies previous. Applicants must reside in Iowa City and be 18 years of age unless specific qualifications are stated. Board of Adjustments, 1 vacancy to fill a 5-year term. Airport Zoning Commission, Iowa City Representative, 1 vacancy to fill a 6-year term. Board of Appeals, Building Design Professional, 1 vacancy to fill a 5-year term. Climate Action Commission, 3 vacancies to fill a 3-year term. Human Rights Commission, 3 vacancies to fill a 3-year term. Parks and Recreation Commission, 3 vacancies to fill a 4-year term. Public Art Advisory Commission, at large, 1 vacancy to fill a 3-year term. Senior Center Commission, 2 vacancies to fill a 3-year term. Applications must be received by 5 p.m. Tuesday, November 9th, 2021. Airport Zoning Board of Adjustment, 1 vacancy to fill a 5-year term. Board of Appeals Licensed Electrician, 1 vacancy to fill a 5-year term. Historic Preservation Commission, East College Street, 1 vacancy to fill a 3-year term. Historic Preservation Jefferson Street, 1 vacancy to fill an unexpired term. Vacancies will remain open until filled. We are at item number 15, and we welcome USG. Hello.
Hi, Council. So we have the City Council meet and greet next Tuesday. So it's during normal council time, so I would assume you guys might have your calendars open if you do want to stop by and say hi to the mayor. But it's 4 to 6 p.m. at the second floor ballroom in the IMU. Hawk the Vote is helping sponsor, so we'll be doing a lot of like advertisement for that this week to encourage students. And then we're almost done with the graphic, and I'm going to be sending that to the comms team for the city, so they'll be able to spread that out as well. On the 28th, we have a partnership meeting with the Partnership for Alcohol Safety. The mayor helped put that together, so we're looking forward to that to discuss sexual assault on campus and in the community. And then I just wanted to say again that there is early voting available on the 26th, the 30th, and the 31st. The one on the 26th is at the Old Cap Town Center, and the other 2 dates are at the Iowa City Public Library. And then tomorrow is President Wilson's welcome from 4 to 6 p.m. at Hancher Auditorium, if anybody wanted to stop by. And then lastly, the Iowa Climate Statement was released by the University of Iowa Center for Global and Regional Environmental Research, and Ellie used to work for them, so that's a cool plug. But they have an article in the Daily Iowan calling on Iowa to strengthen their electric infrastructure. And that's all from us today. Thank you.
Thank you. Lots to take note of today. Yes,
Yeah,
lots
let me
going
know
on.
if you didn't get anything, and I can send that in an email.
Great. Thank you so much. On to item number 16, City Council information.
So I'd add on to what Anna said about voting. You can also vote early at the auditor's office, both directly at the auditor's office, but more conveniently for many people, they have the drive-through voting, early voting again. And really urge people to get out and vote for these local elections, city council and school board. They're usually very low turnout elections, so your vote really does matter in terms of electing local officials. And the other item is that ECOG, the East Central Iowa Council of Governments, is working on their future visioning process. They have a number of focus groups coming up. You can get information if you want to participate on that. This is an area that consists of Benton, Lynn, Jones, Iowa, Johnson, and Washington counties. If you would like information about the upcoming focus groups, you can go to talk2.ecog.org. And there are, for example, there are groups that you can go to in person or by Zoom on food and bioprocessing, insurance and finance, engineering and automation, Main Street and small business, education, technology and services, and biotechnology and medical technology. So they're doing a lot of focus groups to feed into this future visioning process. And if you want more information, I can give it to you. But basically, that the website can get you into pretty much everything. Again, talk to the word .ecog.org. So that's it.
Last Friday evening, the City of Iowa City had an entry in the University of Iowa's Homecoming Parade. Some council members, including the mayor and myself, walked the parade route together with several city staff members, showcasing the city's climate action efforts with a banner and one of our electric vehicles. It was a lot of fun and great to see the positive reaction from people in the crowd that recognized our efforts. Special thanks especially to Zach Berg in the communications department for making the arrangements and for designing the awesome t-shirts. I'll show this because you too can have them. Zach has a bunch of them, and he just asked that you wear them to community functions. and or just being out and about. They're really pretty cool and showcase that we're the City of Literature as well as our climate action logo. So they're really cool. So thank you, Zach, again, for doing that for us. What?
Show and tell.
Do what? Oh, that's it.
I mentioned it at last meeting, but through the end of this week is the Iowa City Book Festival. So check out iowациtybookfestival.org for events continuing through the weekend put on by the UNESCO City of Literature.
I wanted to remind everyone that in November we do have a different schedule for council meetings. We'll be meeting the 3rd and the 5th Tuesday, so November 16th and the 30th. And then in the month of December, we're going to meet on December 14th, which is the 3rd Tuesday. So I wanted to remind everyone of that. All right, we're on to item number 17, reports on items from city staff. Our city manager.
Nothing tonight, Mayor.
Our deputy city manager.
I just wanted to take a moment, this is totally unscripted, but to, as we probably all know, that we lost a great American hero this week, Colin Powell. He personally was a person of inspiration for me personally, and I just wanted to acknowledge that and invite anyone who doesn't know or haven't heard very much about him, take this opportunity to learn about some of the contributions he's made to our country, and a perfect example as a patriot.
Thank you.
Thank you for that. Our city attorney.
Nothing from me, Mayor. Thanks.
City clerk.
Nothing from me.
All right. We're at item number 18. Can I get a motion to adjourn?
Can I make just one really quick comment? Just a quick
Please.
correction. December 14th is the second Tuesday.
Oh, thank you.
It is the 14th that our meeting is, but it's the second Tuesday in case somebody was listening to that.
Thank you.
Yep.
Yes.
And I would like to add on to what Redmond said. I worked under Colin Powell for 4 years at the State Department. Never worked under another Secretary of State who cared about his people so much.
He's a worker mill.
Great. Great. Thank you all. All right. We are at item number 18. Can I get a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Second.
Moved by Mim, seconded by Thomas. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? We are adjourned.